I feel like I've been silent a lot lately because I'm frustrated, because I don't know what to do. I understand what's happening, and in some senses, I've seen it coming for a long time. And with all the levels of this problem that have kept coming over the years, it's been really difficult to see the way out of this. It's the trash compactor. And it's been really difficult to witness what's going on, knowing the truth inherently, as many of you do. And it's especially difficult during a moment of highly orchestrated media talking points and this all-out coordinated takeover of society, which is patently fascist, by the way, but it's really just ingrained fully into the system that has developed for more than a century now. And it's been really difficult because I've not only felt like I am unable to do anything about what's going on, but it's really felt like any sane thoughts, even angry thoughts, it's just like screaming into a hurricane or trying to sing melodically during a blaring concert. It's all for naught. No one's going to hear you. It just gets drowned out in the larger picture, and it just feels like a debilitating drain on my energy to try to keep up with it. And even though it's the right thing to speak out about it, keeping up with speaking out against those things at a certain point feels draining. Isn't that something? It's been difficult to keep up with all these negative news items, even trying to study what's underneath them, even trying to see them for what they are. And now being taunted by such an obvious ruse has been all the harder. It's been hard to see people go along with it, and hearing far too many of them cry for more and justify what's happening. And it's been very difficult to see them pretend that there's a consensus around this. And that's not the first time we've seen that, but it's been all the more difficult now. And I pretty much had this same feeling after 9/11, watching the world be manipulated emotionally and transformed by an ongoing larger media seance, or a session of magic. I don't know what you want to call it, to condition the behavior of the entire population. Certainly here in the United States, and also on a global level, that is still felt deeply by everyone, or nearly everyone. And so for everybody who has also seen that on one level or another and tried to speak out and try to do the right thing about this and many other issues, we know that resistance is very important, and speaking out is essential. It's very, very important. It's also important, though, to recognize the possibilities of falling right into the Hegelian dialectic trap, even when you're trying to do the right thing, and even when you're coming from a wiser position than you were thinking from a couple years before. There's still that danger. It's almost an ever-present danger. Only a few years ago, the phony left-right paradigm was one of the most talked about aspects of the corrupt system, and it felt almost like a universal recognition that the politics that is sold on TV and pushed around to people that everyone pretends is legitimate is so incredibly phony. And they ask people to basically endorse and go out and vote and do your part and be part of democracy and endorse the evil of two lessers, not even just the lesser of two evils. There was a wide recognition of that as being a very crucial and entirely corrupt aspect of the system that itself needs to be done away with. And this criticism was felt by alternative voices on the left, on the right, all across the spectrum, up, down, left, right, backwards, three-dimensionally, and today the chasm between the left and right, instead of being done away with and reduced for the illusion that it is, it's been deepened. And contradictingly so, many abstainers from this pointless system, many critics of the corrupt political system, who see themselves as outsiders opposed to the extremes of the other side, have in turn, because of the extremes of the opposite side, joined back into that system, held their nose, and actually tried to convince themselves and others that it was good to support the destruction of rights. There's a necessary evil to support this system because the other side of it is so bad. Guess how that works out. And, through the reintegration into the political system, it's known in political science, it's known as a political realignment, and I was taught that they tend to happen in history, at least in the U.S. political system, about every 30 years, and ours had been overdue for about a generation, and that might have to do with why it's so wildly swinging. But we see people getting back into that system and digging back in on kind of a new wave of issues. And it's gone pretty far because I see a lot of people who were critical of the system who are now supporting the idea of taking away rights of the other side, who support the degradation of ordinary people, at least socio-economically speaking, so long as that destruction of rights was aimed at their ideological opponents. And rather than focus due criticism, dosed with ample fact and research, at the shadow controllers who pull the strings not only in the political system, but in the banking system and finance, basically every major corporation of every type, in universities and laboratories, starting with the most prestigious down, rather than focusing the role of shadow controllers in healthcare and the dissemination of medical knowledge and the decisions of what kind of treatments are even recognized and supported, and focusing due criticism on the shadow controllers of media, publishing, education, and every other aspect that is attempting to approach a total monopoly, even over the ideas that we think that are consumed by this population, rather than focus on that as a total system with tentacles and different sides and different shades, but which has controllers and subsidiaries and vassals, which despite its contradictions is unified and balanced in the design and towards a larger purpose, rather than focus on that as the issue at hand. Far too many people, especially since the last couple presidential elections, have instead turned their focus away from criticizing that system to a politics of identity and to petty ideology, insignificant cultural clashes, and increasingly segmented them and tried to make them personally felt and really set camps against each other. It's pretty crazy, and it's gotten really out of hand. For several terms of office now, the prevailing energy of the masses, most of these people have been consumed and used up by the underlying question by which to measure every issue, the question of whether or not the current commander-in-chief is the best or the worst, and they're both terrible most of the time, almost all the time. The corporate executives were all bailed out right before this pandemic started and this phase of the collapse, and they got their golden parachutes, their bonuses, and they took off, and new figureheads took over in hundreds of corporations, boards, and trusts, foundations. I mean, these corporate executives, these banker types, this upper 1%, there used to be a lot of heat on them, but after a few years, it's cooled off and they're relatively obscure in spite of two recent financial collapses that have been huge on a global level, especially in the United States. And, the spotlight of 1%, the 99% occupy, there were legitimate issues there. And it also signified that people were recognizing a higher organization of things. So I think it was positive, at least in that sense. Even to the extent that that movement was politically divided and left-leaning and whatever. But the financial collapse of 2011 that helped to drive that movement, it's come back around anyway. A decade later, more biting and stinging than ever. But this time, rather than get a focus on the real system of power that we must resist and encouraging other people to see that and to open their eyes to it, nearly all the people's people, regular people out there, the ones that I've encountered in one way or another, who've taken up issues and become politically aware, politically enlightened, politically engaged, fired up about one issue or another, whether or not I agreed with it, the vast majority of these people have gotten caught on the barbed wire, if you will. snared by the petty traps set out by our formidable enemy, and what's left to really shine a spotlight where it should be shown.
In this world, which is getting more and more closely interconnected, we have to learn to tolerate each other. We have to learn to put up with the fact that some people say things that we don't like. We can only live together in that way.
With the best of intentions, some of us have tried to speak out and change things. And yeah, we're all only one people, but there has been a significant shift in awareness to a certain extent, and I feel good about that. Unfortunately, it's just not enough. There's always been many fights in the struggle, many contradictions, different sides to things, but a lot of legitimate issues, no matter how they're seen on the spectrum. And the unrepresented rightfully have had their own counter grievances, respectively, to each of those types of things. But the long shot of it is that every contrivance of demographic divide has surfaced, ideological camps have been formed, and basically everyone in the so-called political debate, or the sorry, pathetic excuse for one, for generations now have become so dug in to this confusing struggle and whatever camp they adopted inside of this fog of war, that we all generally as a people have been pitted against one another in so many different ways, and have in so many different ways stood in each other's way for a larger lack of vision. And, it's hard to communicate people's differences, and where you just don't agree, it's hard to reach an understanding, of course. But how much of that fuel and energy is burnt off that deserves to be spent on a different fire? Just putting the question out there. Understand there is somewhere a difference between the top-down buzzwords about things like unity and togetherness and community, those types of things, and between expensive promotions and billions of dollars in advertising and news positioning and so forth in order to convey a general contrived message of something like unity, in it together, let's roll, hope and change, make America great again, stay the course, all the other slogans, and to put those out so practically everyone could get on board, or basically everyone in one of the two main camps can back that because it's generic, it's positive, it's nothing anyone really would disagree with, not as words, and whatever your version of that is, whatever unity means to you, or hope and change, your ideas get invested into that general slogan, and you could be under that banner. That's how it works on a larger scale. Those buzzwords are very important. That's why they use them and why they spend such big money promoting such simple concepts. God, we're suckers. But there's a huge difference between that kind of top-down buzzword idea of unity, togetherness, and, say, ever actually coming together as a community. Not as a community that comes together and gives all its power to some kind of dictator or an evil board or something, but a community that can work together wherever it needs to whatever extent. Where that does happen, where community really does exist, you can feel it. You can feel it down in your bones. It's an organic experience, and there's no way to put it into words, and maybe some people scoff at it, but other people know how real that is and can be and how alive it could feel. And so some people understand that and some don't. But that idea of community, it exists pretty easily in physical spaces. Maybe you've noticed them at certain types of festivals and things like that, or local churches or whatever. But can those types of things be meaningfully translated into a larger scale, a mass scale, achieved at a national, at a mass level with 320 million people or 8 billion people, or any kind of numbers like that? Can you really ever have a true togetherness? You can have loose-knit ideas, but not on a practical level. It's scary when it becomes practical. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. And I don't know. It's just propaganda versions of unity and the real idea of us coming together to commonly support our rights, to recognize, the importance of the struggle of the vast majority of the people for whom the system was even designed in the first place. I don't know. I think when they try to get people together on that big of a level, there's scams involved. I think it's a false idea. I think it's an easily manipulated notion. I don't know. I'm very skeptical of it. I think that it should be treated with due skepticism. I doubt the authenticity of anything where everyone's like, gotta do it, gotta do what you're told, gotta do your part. It's for the greater good. Be very careful when things are that scale. That's all I'm saying. When that kind of global response is meant to be felt at all, when its dictates are instantly complied with by every business, every local and state government entity with no real holdouts and no real debate about putting things in a position, and especially when it's done under the idea of it being an emergency and it being under emergency powers. Man, all I'm saying is buyer beware. I guess my point is, while other issues are important, the larger problem that we face, the larger system collapse, that's something we really should focus on. And our consent as people, as individuals, as a community, as a population, it's the big prize. It's one of the big prizes. They cannot operate without consent. If everyone was completely dissatisfied, almost any regime, no matter how terrible, would eventually be toppled over. The issue here is that they've used their media buzzwords, they've used their false sense of community and their false sense of belonging and togetherness, their counterfeit, trite, saccharine, sweet sense of that, to dangle over people and persuade them to give their consent and to think they're doing the right thing by being part of it. That's what I'm saying to question. Our consent here is one of those big prizes, and it's like an unchaste bride with an attractive dowry, that is just giving away her consent too trivially for someone who doesn't even really love her, We should question our compliance in that way. We should question our compliance with this system. Is this a system that deserves our consent, that is worthy of shared power, of taking on that authority? They usually don't ask, and that's usually not a good sign, people. When they do ask, they don't ask very meaningfully, and it's just a procedural thing, and I think everyone can understand that's usually not a good sign. We should be cautious with our consent to this authority and question its basis and legitimacy, whatever the issue is, every time. That should be the basic checklist. Let's be cautious with our consent to this authority and question its basis in legitimacy. Just question number one for every case, especially this time in this pandemic. All this is very hard for some people to understand, and for others, it's obvious and inherent, and it's just repetitious for me to have even pointed it out. And I'm not sure what to do about that difficult distinction. There's a lot of people who have kind of convened over the years. We've heard from each other. We've all seen comments and videos and whatnot, and articles and shared news. So we all become kind of a community who understands that. But then there's still everyone else for whom it's crucial they also understand this and begin to take action. And I have, unfortunately, not enough idea what to do about that very difficult and important distinction. How do we reach those who don't or won't get it? And how do we reach them before it's too late? And so I don't know what to do. But I do think it's important to acknowledge as much of the truth as I know and I can easily encapsulate.
This film has illustrated certain resemblances between the ways pigeons behave in this box under varying reinforcement schedules and the ways people behave under various conditions and circumstances. In general, then, the effects of reinforcement on behavior vary according to the kind of schedule on which reinforcement takes place. These effects clearly have an important bearing on many aspects of education, work, and social adjustment, and present a challenging field for further research.
That they want healthy children, they will therefore want to space them so that they can feed them better, educate them better, clothe them better, and then we shall have a healthier nation. This is what we want to do.
We've been captured by a system of scientific management. We're several centuries into that scientific management. And the evidence is detailed and voluminous, and a lot of it's on the historical record, bottom line.
Aided by interested industrialists, by a wise government, and by their own educated choices, they are deciding to keep families small. In China, India, indeed almost across the globe,
We live in a matured new world of chartered land and people who have been treated as property first and foremost.
My views, which really are government views, is that family planning is an integral part of development planning. You cannot hope to plan other forms of production if you cannot plan the production of the main resource, the human beings. The main resource, the human beings.
We live in a system of classified and weighted and valued people under eugenics. They've scientifically studied and measured people and come up with unscientific, biased ideas of who and what should be promoted, who is allowed to produce with whom.
A jury judges the family's pedigree.
And that eugenical system is supposed to be administered by a wise authority who, by the way, in being wise, also want to be secretive and even unknown altogether. The eugenical system was put in a number of Western countries and laws in the early 1900s. It obviously had great consequences by World War II, but was in play for several decades and well before World War I started. This is it. Eugenics Records Office. This building, which you can't see too well, housed the records office before the other one was built. The Stewart House. Yeah, well, you didn't mention the Eugenics Record Office at all.
Mm-hmm.
That's on campus though, right?
Yeah, so that's before the research part that we're working on now, the molecular research part happened. And we don't want anything to do with that. That's part of the history, right?
But that's why this whole place was founded though.
It wasn't founded for the eugenic research, but it happened. Yeah.
Okay.
And then really unfortunate things happened.
Okay.
But we do none of that anymore here.
If you say so,
Parallel to the advance of eugenics, American genetic research leads the world.
And it was very much a topical classification data collecting system. And I would argue that it's a data collecting system in anticipation of the computer revolution and the data revolution. And I say that having studied it in detail.
Do you know who David Koch is?
Yeah, isn't he one of the Koch brothers?
Well, that's what I thought. He's like the same guy.
I think it is. Okay, that's Cold Springs Harbor Genetic Cornfield.
Agricultural Field Station.
They're growing corn. And under that umbrella of a scientifically managed system, the economy is planned, and it's controlled by a shadow cabinet. Which countries could trade with each other is controlled and planned. What wages are allowed in different countries, what products can be made, what can be imported. And it's not by the older system by which there is at least local advantage for the countries who implemented it. It's now administered scientifically at the global level by a shadow cabinet. It's at least people whose names you could find, but they're not known to the public. No one voted for them. They were appointed, and they have enormous power. We live in a system scientifically managed in which the standards of living are lacking, and based upon allotments and rations and a gifting sort of sense of here's what you need to survive, but you better keep up your part of it. Politics, under the scientifically managed system, is united behind the smokescreen of the left and right divide, as we've already discussed, behind identity politics and hero candidates, and an almost religious fervor, and a knowledge that the easiest way to gain votes is to appeal to them emotionally, not logically or on sound principles. And these father figures and mother figures who represent the, quote, authority of the country, of the nation, of the will of the people even, this false authority is preening around and getting everyone's attention and taking up all this energy, all while the henhouse is being systematically looted of any and all remaining moral capital, the foundations of principles, of good principled ideas. Those are being raided and toppled and destroyed, and other motives are being enhanced in the system. And corruption and all the most selfish motives are enhanced, and even our legislators and political representatives, as hard as it would be to become those people in society, those people are little more than puppets, prostitutes, they go to the highest bidder. That's the scientifically managed system we're in, because it's all illusion management. The science is in making people feel satiated, like they had a hand in the choice, like they are helping to guide the system. That's the left-right divide. Behind it, though, it's just a bought-out system that does the will of the people who supply the most money. So it's a scientifically managed system that's pseudo-scientific. And in this scientifically managed system, obviously the banking system underlies it all, earning interest for the tiny handful of shareholders as it lends money not only to entities but to governments themselves at interest. Money that is then multiplied amongst the population of people in a global market of ersatz commodities, cheap plastic crap that's made under planned obsolescence, everything from electronics to cars designed to break shortly after the warranty and shortly before they want you to start thinking about buying your next model. And all this thinking surrounding this consumerism of politics and society is all driven by the media and the mindsets they reinforce and put into place. That's the scientifically managed system. It's based on conditioning and getting people to willingly accept cheaper and cheaper versions of what they accepted before.
In these experiments, we have demonstrated the effect on behavior and work output of 3 schedules of reinforcement: fixed ratio, fixed interval, and variable interval. We have seen that when an organism gets paid in direct ratio to the amount of work done, work output is fairly constant. We have also seen that when an organism is required to wait a fixed period of time and then is paid for a minimum amount of work, the total output of work may fall off, and the little work that is done comes around payoff time. And finally, we have seen that when the organism is paid at irregular intervals, without any clear relationship to time or to work output, the organism works continuously and at a very high rate.
Under the scientifically managed system, technology takes a philosophical place in society in which machines and devices and computers, etc., aren't just their individual parts, but they're a wave of larger technology, and they go hand in hand with the technique of the owners and the guiders and the operators to control humanity. It's about how that technology is applied, and guess what? It's applied to control humanity. I say that in due respect to research and scholarship. I don't just say that. Technology is not merely about improvement and progress, but it's about an actual belief that technology is the salvation of humanity. For the technocrats, it's almost as if nothing would go too far as long as technology was part of the solution.
Unbelievable progress can be made, both inventing new vaccines and making sure they get out to all the children who need them.
The solution you never asked for, the solution that's worse than the problem you started with, is it technology? The answer is yes.
The benefits there in terms of reducing sickness, reducing the population growth, it really allows a society a chance to take care of itself once you've made that intervention. Reducing the population.
For the technocrats, none of this goes too far because it all supports their larger aim of proper scientific management of the population. And under this system, individual power, the meaning of individual lives, and the weight of our individual decisions especially the most meaningful among them, is dangled in front of our increasingly fragmented and steered and diluted lives. People cluster into their mindset groups, our audience included, and they clash on a regular basis with fresh ideological opponents, and they race to this issue and race to that issue, and a lot of those issues are certainly important and worth talking about, but don't lose the forest for the trees. The ideological opponents that are being clashed with, no matter how naive or stupid or wrong their belief might be, few, if any, of those people hold any real power within the system. Where's your focus? Are you just charging like a bull when you see red? I don't know. Under this system of scientific management, huge amounts of money have gone into further developing technology and into refining and bulking up the systems that they have, the institutions that are designed, at least in theory, to benefit the masses and aid their survival. These powers that be, under this scientific management system, haven't cured poverty. They haven't even taken a serious dent in it. They haven't cured cancer or heart disease or anything else we might put on that list. They haven't healed the wounds of history and the previous clashes between people, or particularly provided a very fair deal for everyone. Some things have gotten better over the years, but not everything. But now, the same system of technology and scientific management, they're ready to sell the public on space missions to Mars, on massive particle accelerators, on new AI systems, on weapon systems ad nauseum, obviously, and every type of technology that in the digital world and with the Internet of Things is invading every inch of space occupied by the interaction of individual people and the society in which they live. They've said, all right, we have individuals, but everything they do in this system, that's what we're going to take data on because we own that part. You might be an individual, but you've got to move around in this room. They're ready for computers and the internet to grow and to feed AI systems combined with the Internet of Things that they plan to invade every inch of space occupied between the people, the individual people of this world, and their interaction with the society in which they live. Every last point of interaction becomes an opportunity for data, for human behavior research, or for the application of social behavior nudging. You might have free will in theory as an individual, but every move you make is tabulated and calculated and used to feed future predictions, to suggest things to you, to nudge you, to condition you, and to lead you on to where someone else, someone who you probably don't even recognize, know, or have a good conception of, an idea that someone else wants to steer you towards. And these are just a few of the issues at hand. Obviously, if we get into specifics, this conversation will never end. And this system, of course, because it's set up on a bad foundation, because it's illusory, because it's corrupt, is crumbling. And all this is now, in our time, in the last few years especially, the last couple decades generally, it's facing system collapse. All the things we had hoped were going to get a little bit better, but that maybe technology could patch over, all the shortcomings that maybe people generally hope will be improved, they've just been kind of moving along as the system that might have made it fair collapses more and more until it just becomes a farcical joke of itself and a very dangerous dying creature. The threats that we see in the media, that we learn about in the news, that as a general rule we were never there to see, these threats, real or just perceived, or a mix in between, about the environment, about overpopulation, about pandemics and terrorism, about medical contagions, even the threats reported in the media about the financial collapse itself, about joblessness and mass unemployment, it's collapsing. And in this collapse, there's nonstop threats and nonstop bad news, and you really have to question who's wagging the dog. All these threats, at least in as much as they're known in the media and not in your real life, these threats in the headlines and on the news, they're either real or they're perceived or they're a mix between. But either way, they're threats that are felt by the population under this scientific management system. and we're cajoled onwards, and the collapse itself accelerates as we feed energy into the false constructs, the narratives that are reported and editorialized and propagandized around these threats, again, whether they're real or perceived. And all that creates confusion and bad energy and a stymied, self-defeating sense. And then the media doubles down with campaigns against people who are individual, against people who have common sense, against people who aren't ready to just capitulate to groupthink because something is reported in the media, and to attack people who question science, who actually read studies and don't just go by the word of some scientist who's on a media show. People who don't share the population's general enthusiasm for this rule by science that is apparently so liked by the masses. You know, one of the biggest memes I've seen out there, not just on the internet, but for many years now when I've met just ordinary people in my life, friends, family, acquaintances, and so forth, people at the grocery store, there's all these people saying, I love science. I'm a fan of science. I appreciate science. Me, I go by the science. And those people, if they're cheering on science or if they just live under a system of scientific management that they only half-heartedly recognize, those people, in accepting and approving and giving their consent for rule by science as a concept, those people in the masses cheering it on, I love science, well, they're trusting the kind of people who have been chosen to be propagated on TV. This is not the idea that we should be ruled by superstition or that we should be Luddites and not accept any advances. But science needs to be checked by a conversation or a mental thought or a checklist concept of power of science and who might or would or will or does benefit from the balance of power when a scientific advance is made and applied. Because most of what we're talking about when we cheer on science or discuss science's role in society is not pure science of, hey, what is true? Are colors real? Is the sky really blue? Let's find out. Let's go calculate it. It's how is science applied? There's a tracking device for cars. There's a camera on the street, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The surveillance society, this technologically managed society, the automated society that has contributed heavily to the unemployment, but not just giving people leisure and time off, but taking away their power to make a difference. You know, this system gains its evil in the way it's applied. By the 20th century was when things were really highly organized. That's when the bankers took larger control of the system. That's when factories began to be automated. And that's when an obvious acknowledgement of what to do with the people, how to manage them with the technology, was clearly taking place.
The Free University, historically the fountainhead of free ideas and scientific discovery, has experienced a revolution in the conduct of research. Partly because of the huge costs involved, a government contract becomes virtually a substitute for intellectual curiosity.
Around the time of World War I, we reached a new phase in the application of science. That's when the military-industrial complex was truly born. That's when scientific research as a body of government institutional funded, publicly funded research really began. And when it began, it was only in specific concert with the branches of the military and with the university systems. The laboratories and universities came together with the military and with the corporations, and the application of these scientific advances was from the very beginning of the World War I and pre-World War I time. It was coordinated. And through both world wars and the reorganization of society in the post-war era, so much power has been taken away and given to that system, invested in it.
This was secret. This was a secret. We weren't in on it.
The power of choice, the power of destiny, our power and control as individuals has been seriously lapsed, and some people haven't recognized as an illusion of that power. The semblance of that individual power has been reintroduced it to our consciousness and used as a kind of reassuring blanket when it's not really there. That power has been vested somewhere else by you and your consent, and you fail to get it back. You're gleaning onto the idea that you have power. You become a cheerleader or even just a crowd stadium enthusiast for the scientific management system. Why? Because yay science, because it's a bumper sticker, because there's a celebrity guy who says he's a scientist who's on a bunch of talk shows and says, the best thing we could do is obey scientists.
I think we're in the middle of a massive experiment. The experiment is, will people listen to scientists? Mm-hmm. Maybe the coronavirus will just blow on by with a minimum of cases. And then we kicked its ass for obeying the recommendations of scientists.
But the people who've quarantined and who've been meticulous and vigilant and so on, who've not been infected, in fact, we're saying, well, maybe they're at the highest risk once they come out of their quarantine and of being so obedient.
We're in a bad way having the conversation on those terms and cheering it on. Your lives, too, have been consumed by this total system collapse, and part of the reason for the collapse is the giving away of individual power, but now by community after community, population after population, by the millions, by the billions. It affects us all in different pervasive ways. So, what is the solution? What can be done about it? Unfortunately, I don't know. I don't know the solution. Apart from taking a personal stand and trying to live my life by principles that I think are right, trying to live my life as disengaged from that corrupt system as possible, choosing to opt out where I can, not volunteering for any programs or asking for handouts. But living that way is becoming more difficult, and that system is becoming way more pervasive. As Eric Schmidt himself said during this pandemic fallout, he said, in essence, to paraphrase, in the new era, technology is required. You will have to have your cell phone or the internet on a computer to conduct business.
So all of a sudden, the internet is no longer optional. It's fundamental to doing business, to operate, to live our lives.
That system is more imposing and invasive than ever. And it is harder to opt out and take any kind of personal stand. I do what I can. I hope you are too. It's not the full solution, though. And the political climate today, the experts on TV telling everyone what to do about the pandemic and all the other issues, is one in which they're attempting to make more and more things mandatory. They want an authorization. They want a check. They want a system of technology to track and trace and authorize you. And most of you know that, and it's pretty plain to see, but it's worth recognizing. Authorization and authority are part of the same word. It's the same root word of author. Who's the author of your life? Who has true authority? And especially what man or system of science even, which is still a system of man, which of those systems has due authority over your life to the extent that the system today has? Is such a system supposed to know everything that you do and everything about us collectively? Is that a good system? Is that headed in a good direction? Are you going to do anything about it? And can you do anything about it? Can we all still do anything about it? I wish I had a better answer. I thought the mantra of progress and human dignity, even as it's been, scattered across this ideological conflict, was basically my body, my choice. My body, my choice. That's my sovereignty. Your authority, so-called, should stop long before it gets to my toes and my fingers and my head, but it definitely stops there. The point is, why does this scientific management system get to decide who gets what injection or who gets to reproduce and with whom and who gets to live here and who gets what level of handout and monetary support and material support? Whether your luck is good or not in that system and whether you have a little better than others or not, it's a dangerous system. It's not healthy. And there must be a way to think our way out of this. I wish I had that solution for you, but so far I don't. Action without thought will be pointless, whatever the intentions. So whatever is done, better be well thought out, and it better be the right thing to do in this situation and in the situation generally. I know that there must be a way to think our way out of this. For us as individuals, for all of society, there's got to be a solution to this. But we're obviously blinded to it at this moment. We're obviously at a major crossroads and the major turning point of a great starting over. I think it's pretty clear that there will be a reset. That system has been collapsing, good, bad, or indifferent. And the question hinges around whose reset? The one designed by self-interested, colluded, working together in secret technocrats who've assumed authority over the entire population, or something else, one which restores dignity and hope, I guess, for a people who've been deluged by technology, who have forgotten their purpose in many cases, who've given authority over to devices and bureaucrats, and who've been in different ways replaced and outcompeted and even outthought and boxed in.
This bird is reinforced only at the end of each 1 minute period, even if he pecks 100 times, though he must peck the disc at least once to activate the food dispenser. He soon learns the minimum amount of work he must do for this type of reinforcement schedule and takes it easy in between payoff times.
I hope there is someone. I hope someone can think this through and really find the true solution, someone authentic and relatively uninterested in self-gain within the ranks of this rotten system, even better if they're outside of the system, but someone who can articulate the problem and see it for what it is and who wants to see the way out for the benefit of the bulk of humanity and not for the perpetuation of a system that has long been dedicated to enslaving us. Sorry if that's a loaded word, but when you give up all your choice and authority and power to make individual decisions, to make decisions for yourself, when you lose that, the condition is slavery. It could be the most fairyland friendly version of it where you don't even know you're enslaved, but we're talking about the basic condition here. And I don't want to live in that system. I want to maintain humanity and dignity and individuality. And I really pity those who don't want that. There's got to be a solution, and I want to see it. I can see that there is a solution, that it must be there. I just can't see that solution. But maybe if someone else is able to see it, standing on the shoulders of giants or midgets or whom they might, then maybe we can all see it. Maybe there'll be a 100th monkey effect, and once enough people conceptualize in their own mind what the solution would be and see that it's a good solution and worth working towards, and once someone else sees it, you tell a friend, they tell a friend, or someone else realizes it on their own on a desert island, once enough people see it, maybe then we can all see it, and then we'll know what it is we're supposed to be working towards instead of just fighting for the faster destruction, not only of the system and of the little pellets and benefits that come out of the system as miniature bribes that everyone has to take because everyone needs to survive and everyone needs to eat and have a place to live, not just so we could see a way for that to work and stop collapsing, but so we could see a system that actually reflects the values of being an individual person with vested power, with agency within themselves, who is worthwhile because they can think, because they can make their own decisions, and because they have something important to say or do. Maybe that's just a dream. But I really hope someone could see it so I could see it too. You know, it's pretty much the problem of the Gordian Knot. All right, so I'm going to read this. It's on Wikipedia, but it gets the point across. The Gordian Knot is associated with Alexander the Great. It's often used as a metaphor for an intractable problem, untying an impossibly tangled knot, solved easily by finding an approach to the problem that renders the perceived constraints of the problem mute, i.e., cutting the Gordian knot. So there's this famous knot in the mythology. Nobody could figure out how to untie it. It was all complicated. It was a special knot. And even the best people couldn't figure it out. And after Alexander the Great, who conquered all those lands, after he was vexed with the problem, I think he took his sword and cut through it. He cut through the knots. If you can't untangle them, if you can't untie them, then there's the sword just to cut through them and get it off.
Strangely, before subduing Phoenicia, he struck north towards Gordian. Perhaps because of the challenge it presented. The ancient world's greatest puzzle was there, a knot that couldn't be untied. Alexander cut it in two with his sword. Lateral thinking, you see, centuries ahead of his time.
You know, Einstein is famously, or at least frequently quoted as saying, we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. And of course, it's a truism. Other people have said it in other ways. You can't solve the problem with the kind of thinking that got you into the problem. Here we are, having been a people who gave away their power and authority to an undue system. You know, we blew it, but we could try again. But we're not going to solve the problem by perpetuating the problems that made the problem worse. And I really hope that becomes clear as this situation advances, as they try to convince people that things are mandatory and that making something mandatory somehow makes it right. There's got to be a way. There's got to be a better way. We've got to find a way to solve our problems by thinking outside of the box of those problems. This is the Gordian Knot. There's got to be a way. There's got to be a way. Somehow, there's got to be a way. Unfortunately, that's the final desperate line from Soylent Green, which is like the personification of our own cannibalistic industrial system of eating ourselves. You know, unfortunately, that's a last desperate cry at the end of a horror movie and dystopic future. And our present situation is tending in that sort of direction. Pick one or more dystopian futures. You pick one you think looks like the way things are going. Only don't buy into it too much. Let's not put our thinking only in that direction, because if we can envision something different, a better alternative, something that's actually positive, maybe we could, in theory, set the course straight. Again, if we see the solution and see it in a way that we could believe it within ourselves, maybe we could finally execute it somehow. I would love to see that. The example would have to be made. Someone who really sees it would have to make the right example at the right time, the right symbol, you know, that hits just the right note. I'm really not talking about the existing governments. I'm talking about how do we see outside of the problems that we've created. I'm not talking about adopting a resource-based technocracy either, okay? Let's keep thinking. There are no utopian solutions, and WALL-E is not a utopian solution. No world made of flesh or holograms or digital ones and zeros will ever offer a perfect balance of everything that allows a perfect sense of justice and fairness for everyone and opportunity. It's a good ideal to strive towards, but don't buy into it too much. Let's keep thinking. Our journey here is to recognize how much power we have given up as a community of individuals at the expense of someone else's vision for us to live as a collectivized unit managed by them and their friends, managed by them and those who are colluded in it, managed by the leading stockbrokers and estimators and accountants and planners and administrators, think tanks, policymakers, petty bureaucrats, AI chatbots and algorithms too, which are contrived now to do so much of the heavy lifting. You know, our journey is to recognize the power we have given up in that system, even though there are free giveaways and there are programs for people, and some people need that now. But I'm talking about seeing outside of that. Do what you got to do now, but see outside of it and start working towards it, please. You know, there are countless examples here of far too many people voluntarily giving away their power and authority, and I think that's the best I can do at telling you what's at the root of this problem.
You have no power over me.
The rest of it, I'm trying to see, but I'm admitting I haven't seen yet, and I really hope someone else can. The scale of harm that can be done by an inept official or even an inept private citizen in their own messy life is nothing compared to the evils of a highly competent official working under undue authority. It's the recipe for everything we hold ill, especially if you're not their chosen group. We must guard the circles of power and spheres of influence in our own life, taking them on voluntarily and in goodness and with forethought, if at all. And we must guard against any one ring or any several small rings of concentrated power. In that sense, it's Lord of the Rings and Gollum and Sauron. In that sense, one world is no world at all if it's controlled by one ring of concentrated power under a system of man or technology created by man. No. Say no, and let's keep thinking. Shakespeare wrote in Henry V, "Turn him to any cause of policy, the Gordian knot of it he will unloose, familiar as his garter." Well, I guess we need that from someone who's coming from the right place on the benefit of ordinary people who just want a basically decent system and then hopefully better, and not the crap that we're living under. All right, we need someone who can envision and see this Gordian knot solution so that we can all see it. It's also the problem of a minnow trap. And from the point of view of a minnow, it's an inward funnel of seeming opportunity from which there's then little hope for escape. If a catalyst or a frightening incident can occur in front of that minnow trap, then it can provide the energy needed for the reaction of trapping the minnow. That is to say, the stimulus of surprise, a scare, then creates an incentive for that fish to not only move, but to change its motion into evasive action. And once evasive action is initiated, it's just a matter of being steered into the trap and going down the tunnel of no return. Once the minnows are provoked, once the inciting incident occurs, once there's a big thing they talk about on the media that no one can ignore and everyone must obey, once there's a situation too big for anyone to handle or contain, once those minnows are provoked, they're easily enough steered into the trap, gradually at first down the tunnel, then past the threshold, which evades their processes of logic and thinking until it's too late. And lest we should degrade the mind of the simple minnow, it's worth pointing out that the bulk of humanity, i.e. the most decent part of us on the whole, are easily duped into the same exact type of trap. This is in essence the problem we must solve. How can we avoid the point of no return in this general trap that we're caught in? It's the trap of problem-reaction-solution, the Hegelian dialectic. An alarming stimulus pops up. Most of the people react. At the same time, the specter of too much control pops up on the other hand and causes the other group of people to react. But the problem is that we're facing a scientific management system which has thought many moves ahead, and the problem and its reaction have both been anticipated. And the reaction, even when it's done for the right reasons and in response to good issues, tends toward the solution concocted by the controllers of this scientific experiment. It's not the fact that science can study conditioning and know that it's a true factor, it's the fact that the conditioning is used by the scientific management class to control and trick and befuddle and confuse and steer us into their traps. It's the problem of being still too naive to recognize the problem-reaction solution. How do we recognize the true problems for what they are and not get caught in going further and further down the narrowing tunnel? Please, I really hope someone could see their way out of this and then tell me about it.